Okay, guys. Can I tell you all a story right quick?
Yeah, we good.
So there was this guy who was always late, and his doctor prescribed, he said, you should sleep in an herb garden.
Weird.
Do you know why?
Why?
So that way he was always on time. All right.
Well,
with that, we're gonna
welcome
start
back to the lab.
We're gonna start our
Beebe and
presentation
Mckenna.
on the perception of time, and Jenna's gonna get us started. Jenna, what do you have for us?
Stuff on the perception of time. Okay. So the question that we have to start with is, how do we measure temporal cognition? Because it's not easy. So there are two things. One of them is perspective timing, and the other is retrospective timing. So in perspective timing tasks, participants were asked to consider a time as they were doing that task. This is also known as estimation or explicit timing, and it typically involves neural substrates such as the basal ganglia, supplementary motor cortex, the cerebellum, and the prefrontal cortex. Retrospective timing is activities that participants are asked about the timing after the task is over, so it's like a surprise, and it's also known as temporal prediction or implicit timing, and this involves substrates such as the cerebellum, the left lateral premotor cortex, and the left lateral parietal cortex. So we left the left. That was not a political comment. So some components of temporal cognition, basically what affects the way that we think. Temporal cognition is the same thing as time perception. So the first is perception as in magnitude. That's kind of involved with bottom-up processing. And that says that most of the literature says duration is positively related to the intensity of the stimulus. And that means that the more intense the stimulus, the greater the perception of time. And then there's attention and memory, which are your top-down processes. And those are basically saying stuff that you're familiar with, if you're paying attention to it and thinking about it, or if it's something that's encoded in your memory, it's going to take longer, or you'll perceive it as longer because it's something that you're familiar with. So you'll process it really quickly, and then you have more time to think about it. And so you feel like you're doing more activities in that same time span, and it will appear longer. And then two major models of temporal cognition. The first is the internal clock model, and this says that we have an internal pacemaker. And when we have to start timing something, this valve shuts and it just kind of like collects ticks. So it's like 1, 2, 3. And then they accumulate, and after timing is over, you compare the number of ticks to other things in your stored in your long-term memory. The problem with this model is that it does not predict what kinds of stimuli change the function or why that is. So if this were the case, then it should be consistent all throughout, but it's not. And the second model that is used is called the common magnitude system. And this says that time processing is done altogether in the parietal cortex, and it's processed with magnitude. So that's like how bright a stimulus is, or how many of a stimuli there are. Or it could be like auditory, how loud it is, or something like that. And typically with those things, as I said earlier, we see like the more there is, the longer it feels. And so this explains why magnitude affects time perception, because they're all processed together. But it does not, time perception does not affect magnitude, and this model does not speak to that. So that's a really quick overview of some of the ways that we process time.
Thanks so much for that, Jenna. That was actually really interesting.
Of course it was.
It's about time. I mean, come on. Okay, so next I'm going to take us through a little bit of time perception and how our emotions can be involved in that process and just kind of help us perceive time or actually kind of hinder us from perceiving time, which is why it's called, as you can see on the slide, the time emotion paradox. So something that's really interesting about this, the time emotion paradox, is the idea that we all inherently kind of believe that we have some kind of internal measure that allows us to kind of gauge time, measure time, and to some extent, every human does. However, two important notes about that is that it's subjective. So our perception of time is different than every other person's in the world. And two, emotions can play a huge role in that. And so I'll break that down a little bit. So this can be any level of emotion, from really extreme to really low. You can just be bored, and that can affect your view of time. So in the study done by Droit Villet et al. In 2009, they looked at how emotions of others or emotions of yourself, anywhere from maybe severe anger to boredom to happiness to just feeling lackadaisical, how those different emotions could make you feel like time was going really fast or time was going really slow. And what they seemed to conclude was that when things were sad or not as fun or boring, or there was anger or something like that, time would stretch out for a really long time. But when things were good or it was happy or it was like a yay moment, then time would go by super quickly. So it's highly contextualized. So, and then finally, one other note about that is it, as I said, it's dependent on others. It's also dependent on your environment. So it could be if you're at home, if you're on a trip, these kinds of things, the excitement level and the level of just awareness of what's going on around you can also really affect how you view time. So really quickly, we're going to do an activity. This is my favorite part. And this will be linked in a YouTube video that we can put up. These are my two participants, Jenna and Beebe. And I'm going to have you guys, what you're going to do is you're going to jump up and down on one leg, and you can either bark like a dog or meow like a cat. And I'm going to time us. And then afterwards, you're going to tell me just about how long you thought it was. And then I'm going to tell you how long it really was. And so we're going to see.
While we're doing that?
Speak while we're doing it. So we're going to see if your level of discomfort makes you feel like time is longer or shorter.
Okay.
Or your level of excitement. Yeah. Okay, and go. Y'all are doing great. You're doing great, guys. You're doing great. And you can stop.
Okay.
Praise the Lord.
So how long did y'all roughly think that y'all were going for?
Maybe like 30 seconds.
Okay,
Yeah,
and Jenna?
35.
Yeah. Y'all are actually going for just about 20 seconds.
Damn.
So that's like a really small example of how your emotions or maybe your discomfort level can affect how you view time, and it really stretches it out. So next, we're going to hear from Beebe.
Hello.
Welcome to the table, Beebe.
It's about time we talked about our mental health. Am I right?
Praise the Lord.
So just as a general reminder, no one disorder is simply classified as a false perception of time. But mental health disorders really do affect how we feel like time is passing. So a lot of things in the discussion are framed as a hyper focus on a certain point in time. So some mental health disorders will help you focus on the future, some more on the past. I'm going to jump into a few of those. So first of all, we have major depressive disorder and PTSD. So I've grouped these two together because both of these change your perception of time and that they make you focus more on the past. So with depression, you are focused on things that have gone wrong in the past. And with PTSD, you are focused on a trauma that has happened in the past, which is kind of bleeding into the present. So with depression, people report that time passes slowly. This can be due to a few different things, but a main theory is that you're being directed away from meaningful engagement in the present, and therefore you feel like things are moving slowly because you don't have mental space to like keep track of time. Moving on to PTSD. So PTSD does really confusing things with time. You can feel like time is moving really fast or really slowly. That's because you have a lot of trouble placing things into a time context. There's always a sense of threat, and there's always intrusive thoughts and memories that are flooding over from the past into the present. So you can't really tell if what's happening right now is something that happened before or something in the present, and that makes it really hard to know how long it's been. In this study that I have listed, they show that both groups of people who have these disorders show a poor estimate of time passing when they're told, just like Mckenna told us, to track how long it has been. They do worse than that than people who don't have these disorders. And PTSD patients kind of track time as moving the slowest, which is interesting. Next up, we have anxiety. So anxiety changes your perception of time in that you're hyper-focused on the future. You're in a constant state of fear of things that could happen. So time is perceived as moving faster. Some studies suggest that this is due to a cognitive overload. So your brain is flooded with all of those thoughts that are really scary, and you don't have enough time to figure out how much time is passing. This study, though, kind of pushes against that theory and argues that it's not overload, but more of an evolutionary process. So your brain is just switched into fight or flight, and so you're not thinking about time at all. But both of those are really interesting theories. And then last, we have a general overview of cognitive illnesses. So these are all mental health illnesses that are lifelong. And this framework states that your future and your past are collapsed to be the same. So you don't feel like there's any hope of your future being any different than your past has been with your diagnosis. And so time loses any sense of passing, and there's this feeling of timelessness. So they tie perception of time to change or lack thereof. So yeah, that's all I've got for you guys. But here are references.
Thanks, guys, so much for watching.
Wait, stop. I have one more really important question just
What?
before we go.
Yeah, what's up?
Yeah. So, how do you know if your clock is hungry?
I don't know.
How do you know?
I've never asked.
It goes back for seconds.
Oh my gosh.
Do you,
Four seconds.
4 seconds.
Wow.
Bye. Bye.